All right. Well, hey, I'm excited about this series. A couple of months ago, was talking with Jerry, who helps me with sermons and things like that, and he suggested a series along these lines, and it's become one that I've gotten really excited about over time, because we're going to walk through Psalm 23. And if you're not familiar with Psalm 23, you actually probably are, even if you don't realize it. Psalm 23 is a psalm that is often used at things like funerals, which can feel heavy. But Psalm 23 is a lot more than that. It's probably one of the most famous passages in all of the Bible. And so today and for the next few weeks, we're going to walk through this psalm bit by bit. And we're just going to take a little chunk at a time. And then in the final week, we're going to go through the whole psalm as one unit. And I think that what you're going to find throughout this series is, first of all, a new appreciation for it, for those of you who know it. But secondly, what I hope we all encounter through this series is a much more rich understanding of exactly who Jesus is. Now, my great-grandfather was a farmer. I come from a long line of farmers on that side of the family, and he lived out in Coshocton County, and he had a lot of land and farmed crops, but one of the other things he did was he had sheep. My great-grandfather was 97, I believe, when he passed. I was about 20, and so I knew him relatively well. We would go up a couple times a year and visit, and I always found his house very, very boring. There was nothing to do there except look out the binoculars down the hill at my great-uncle Joe's house, just see what was going on down there. But one of the things that I remember very early on, and I only have a tiny memory of it, was his sheep barn. He kept sheep, and I just thought it was really interesting. I have this one very vague memory of going down there, and I believe there were still sheep in it during this one memory. The barn stood for many more years, but I seem to remember actually encountering sheep down there once. He didn't have them much when I was alive. He was older at that point, but he was a shepherd. And so this is kind of a fun series for me because of that connection. But as we're going to talk about more in a little bit, when I say the word shepherd, the image that comes to my mind is my great-grandfather's property. And I can see the hills, and his house sat on the top of this hill, and then the barn was kind of just down from it. And I remember the pastures and the fields and the barn. And my guess is you probably get a similar picture in your mind. But as we look at Psalm 23, and we look at this idea of the good shepherd, the images that we have in our mind are likely nothing like the images that the writers would have had in theirs. Now, we're going to get to that more in a minute, but I at least wanted to set it up because I want you to have some kind of an image in your mind when you think of the word shepherd. Now, this series is going to be a lot of fun for me because I'm a little bit of an antagonist by nature, for those of you who do not know that yet. I like to poke at things. I like to kind of pick things apart. I like to deconstruct things. I find it fun. I find it enjoyable. And one of the things that I'm going to do in this series, and really what we're going to focus on today, is the fact that there's some things that I think we need to deconstruct a little bit in our faith. For some of us, our faith is, it's real. But when we talk about that we're following Jesus, we don't maybe even know what that means. We may not be able to put words to, well, I'm a Jesus follower, but like day in and day out, I don't know exactly what that looks like. There's also this cultural tension right now, depending on the circles that you swim in, around being a sheep. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not making any kind of a political statement at all, although this language tends to live in political realms right now. But there's this language around not being a sheep. There's a negative connotation to being a sheep because sheep are somewhat unintelligent animals. That's probably putting it kind of mildly, actually. They're frankly pretty dumb. Sheep are not very capable of taking care of themselves. Sheep are known to be followers. And so this idea of not being a sheep is like, live your own life and don't let anybody tell you what to do, and you should be a leader of the pack, not a follower. And while a lot of that stuff can sound nice on the surface, it does create some problems then when we think about faith and we talk about being a Jesus follower. And it especially creates problems when we think about the fact that throughout the Bible, there is this shepherd metaphor that's used a lot. Or if I could sum it up or say it one more way, for a lot of us in our faith, we don't mind at all Jesus being Savior, but we don't like Jesus being shepherd. Because being Savior feels good. We're saved, we're set free, but now we want to use that freedom to do what we want instead of using that freedom as a way to follow Him more closely. So today we're going to look at this idea of shepherd. We're going to read the first part of Psalm 23. We're going to look at some passages that talk about shepherd, that talk about God as shepherd throughout the Bible. And we're going to kind of set up the series a little bit. So Psalm 23, starting in verse 1. Now, I've had a couple people ask me this recently. I almost always read from the NIV on Sunday mornings. And that is just because I like it, to be frank. I like it. I have my whole life. It's a good translation. It reads clean. And so I use the NIV pretty much exclusively on Sunday mornings. Today, for this part for Psalm 23, we're going to be reading from the ESV, because this is one of the passages in the Bible where the traditional reading makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. All right? So I wasn't going to go all the way to King James. It just wasn't. But the ESV translates it the same way, so we can use the ESV here. All right? So Psalm 23, verses 1 through 3 say this: "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for His name's sake." Now, if you weren't sure if you knew the psalm before, for some of you, you're like, oh yeah, I've heard that one, right? "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul." There are very, very few passages in all the Bible that do more inside of me than that does. It feels peaceful. Right? It feels serene. It feels like in the midst of a life and a world that is crazy and that is hectic, and that with 3 young kids, all with their different schedules, and a wife who works full-time and my full-time, and it feels like something I don't have access to very often. It just feels nice. And it makes me want to go there, right? I mean, it's funny because it's so easy for me to picture my great-grandfather's house, again, that sat on top of this hill, and just these rolling, if you've been to Coshocton, it's just rolling hills everywhere. And I mean, he lived outside of town in the country, and it was beautiful. It was gorgeous. My grandfather's house was up in Ashland, and it was beautiful. It was this farm and rolling hills, and it makes me want to go. It makes me want to, in some ways, escape life and just be somewhere where there's peace. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Now, the man who wrote this was a man named David, and if you're not familiar with David, I preached a 10-week series on David a few years ago, so I will try to avoid going too deep. He's probably my favorite character in the Bible. I love David so much. But David is interesting in this context because David is best known as being the king of the nation of Israel, the giant slayer. But David, before all of that, was a shepherd. That was what he did for most of his life. His father Jesse had flocks, and David's older brothers were in the army, and David was the one who was tasked with caring for the sheep. David was quite literally a shepherd. We don't know for how long, but it was for many years. He was experienced as a shepherd. When David writes, "The Lord is my shepherd," the image that David gets in his mind is an image that is wildly different from what you and I probably get in ours today. And that matters a whole lot. Now, the first verse of that, I want to jump back to that for just a second. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." In the NIV, it translates it in a way that's a bit more understandable, perhaps. In the NIV, it says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing." I shall not want. It's the same idea. I have no needs. I lack nothing. All is provided for me. Here's the thing. I mentioned a moment ago that when I read this, I don't know, it just moves my soul, like the depth of me, right? I want to go to this place. But there's a problem if we read this passage simply as kind of this religious escapism, we actually miss the power of it. And we miss the power of it because that wasn't the point of what David was writing. The point isn't the green pastures and the still water. The point was who the shepherd is. That's why David starts with, the Lord is my shepherd. Another way that we could translate this that might help us understand it a bit is we could just add one tiny word in the middle. We could say, the Lord is my shepherd, so I shall not want. The Lord is my shepherd, so I lack nothing. See, David understood something that we don't understand today. When we think of shepherding, when I think of my great-grandfather's house, I think of the barn, I think of the hills, the pastures, the fences. My great-grandfather would go down and he would let the sheep out of the barn. The sheep would roam throughout the day in the pastures that he let them into. They would eat, they would drink, they would return to the barn at night, and the barn would be closed to keep the sheep safe. In other words, my grandfather was not a hands-on shepherd. He didn't live with the sheep. He provided the infrastructure that provided for the sheep. That wasn't the kind of shepherd David was. In the ancient Near East, shepherds would have lived with their sheep. There would have been some sort of a pen or an area at Jesse's home, at David's father's home, there would have been an area for the sheep. But there would not have been enough land there for the sheep to stay there and get their sustenance and be safe. And so what a shepherd would do is a shepherd would take a herd of sheep, and they would go with them, and they would travel, and they would migrate around, and they would find green pastures, and they would find still waters. And the shepherd's job was to lead the sheep and to protect the sheep. Because as they're doing this, there would be lions, which lived in the ancient Near East at that time. And there would be bears, which lived in the ancient Near East at that time. There would be predators who see a flock of sheep and want a meal. And the shepherd's job was to protect the sheep, to lead the sheep, and to provide everything the sheep needed so that they could thrive. When David says, the Lord is my shepherd, he is not picturing a barn that the shepherd lets the sheep out of and then they just kind of do their own thing. David is picturing someone who lives with the sheep, who knows the sheep intimately by name, and they would have likely had names. Someone who leads the sheep and guides them and protects them when enemies come. Someone who, when the sheep get themselves into a mess, the shepherd saves them from the mess. It was a very different image. Weeks at a time, maybe months at a time, the shepherd would be out with the sheep. In reality, the shepherd likely spent more time with the sheep than they did their family. That's a totally different image. They didn't go let the sheep out and do their thing and then go have dinner and then put the sheep back in the barn. The Lord is my shepherd, so I lack nothing. Let me show you another image of shepherd from the book of Isaiah, as you keep that image of what a shepherd was in your mind. Isaiah chapter 40, verses 10 and 11. The prophet Isaiah writes this, "See, the sovereign Lord comes with power, and he rules with a mighty arm. See, his reward is with him, and his recompense accompanies him. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young." Now, I want to go on a very brief aside here for a moment. I'm going to ask you to be honest about something for a minute, okay? We had a real fun happening at my house this week. Total honesty. How many of you did not or do not know that a lamb is a baby sheep? Did anybody not know that? Truly? No one in the room? Everyone knew that a lamb is a baby sheep? No. I wasn't going to give away which one of us it was. Found out this week that my wife did not know that a lamb is a baby sheep. She thought they were different animals entirely. which I laughed very hard at. And my mom we laughed, we had a long laugh about that one. Like she Googled it. And I was like, I mean, you can Google it. This is not going to end well for you. So I was not going to give it away, but you did. So let me read this one more time. See, the sovereign Lord comes with power, and he rules with a mighty arm. See, his reward is with him, and his recompense accompanies him. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs, the most vulnerable ones, the young ones. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. Here's what I want you to see in this passage. The Lord is pictured as a shepherd who is gentle and who is caring. But if you notice the beginning of the passage, the Lord is pictured as strong, as having a mighty arm. Why? Because shepherds would have had to have been tough. Like, you're not fighting a lion. You're not fighting a bear. If you're like, you've got to have a certain level of no fear. You've got to have a level of strength, a level of courage that honestly is far beyond what I can imagine. We're going to Colorado this summer for our family vacation. My family's never been out there. I've been a couple times and I love it. We always do beach vacations and I was like, can we please go somewhere else? So we're going to Colorado. We just booked it the other day. We're going to like the Colorado Springs area where Pikes Peak is and that kind of thing. And this cabin that we're staying in, there's a bear warning, which is awesome. Like, it's so cool, right? Like, you got to keep your food stuff inside. You can't be leaving stuff. Don't leave your trash, because bears can come. Now, to be clear, if a bear shows up, I'm not fighting it. If it's trying to break down our door, I don't care. I'm going to call somebody to come deal with it. I'm not fighting it because I'm not dumb. That's what a shepherd had to do. The shepherd protecting the sheep was essential because the sheep were the shepherd's livelihood. Without the sheep, there was no income. It was monetarily valuable. The shepherd had to protect the sheep. David himself fought lions. He fought bears. David was a tough dude. Whatever image you have in your mind of a shepherd, I don't know what it is, but it's probably not what a shepherd was. It's certainly not what David was. The Lord tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arm and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. That's a beautiful picture of tenderness and of mercy. But the sovereign Lord comes with power and he rules with a mighty arm because he must. My favorite image of this is the Nile crocodile. I've shared this before, but it's been a few years. The Nile crocodile has the most powerful bite force on earth. The Nile crocodile also carries its babies in its mouth when they're in danger. It's just this really cool picture of unbelievable strength and power with incredible gentleness at the same time. It's a little bit like a cat, right? I mean, a cat can bite with some ferocity, but they'll also carry their babies by their neck in their mouth without hurting them at all. This is the image that we have of the Lord as shepherd. There's power, there's strength. Shepherds in the ancient world lived outside with sheep. They knew the sheep by name. The sheep knew them. They faced predators. They fought off lions. The shepherd was literally responsible for life and death. So when David says, the Lord is my shepherd, he's not saying something that looks nice on a graphic, that looks cool on a flannel board, for those of you that know what those are. David's not saying something that's neat. He's saying, my whole life depends on him. Now, let me give you one more picture. This is from John chapter 10. So we're going to jump to the New Testament now. This is Jesus talking. And this is a long passage. There's a lot I could break down in here, but I'm just going to read it straight through and then give some thoughts at the end. John chapter 10, starting in verse 1, Jesus says, very truly, I tell you Pharisees, that anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. I want you to remember that image for a moment. We're going to come back to it. When he has brought out all of his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. File that one too. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore, Jesus said again, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and are robbers, but the sheep haven't listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. But I'm the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father." Jesus is the good shepherd. That's where the series comes from. Psalm 23 is a beautiful passage. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul." But without understanding that Jesus is the good shepherd, the psalm doesn't work the way it should. Now, David writes the psalm long before Jesus, but Jesus and the Father are one. Jesus identifies it here. There's so much that could be broken down in this passage. It's rich, it's beautiful. Jesus is talking about the future, but the one thing that I want us to zero in on today is the voice of the shepherd. Because the voice of the shepherd is powerful, and it matters tremendously. Jesus talks about it a few different times. I mentioned it early on. Jesus says he calls his own sheep by name and he leads them out. When he's brought them out, he goes on ahead of them and his sheep follow him because they know his voice, but they won't follow a stranger. They'll run away from a stranger because they don't recognize his voice. And Jesus later on says, "They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd." And here's why this matters. Again, we're going to pick apart a little bit what we might think of when we think of a shepherd. Because when I think of a shepherd, and maybe this isn't the case for you, but when I think of a shepherd, even when I try to put myself contextually in the Old Testament, in the ancient Near East, I think of a shepherd as a sheep herder. I mean, it's kind of baked into the word. Sheep herder. Well, a herder is someone who pushes a herd. Think cowboys, right? You're behind the herd and you're pushing them in a direction. But that's not actually the way shepherding worked. Jesus identifies it here, and we know just from ancient history that the way shepherding worked was exactly what Jesus describes. It's a very different thing than with other livestock management. See, sheep have an incredible ability to learn and recognize the voice of their shepherd. In the same way that, like, if you have a dog, your dog knows your voice, right? When I talk to our dog, he responds differently than he does to the other members of our family because I'm not as nice to him as they are. He listens a little better, and I don't care at all. It's the same idea that sheep actually recognize the voice of their shepherd. And there may be, like, if a particular person had very, very large herds or very large flocks. It is flocks. I said flocks earlier and corrected myself. It's apparently flocks. If a shepherd had very, very large flocks, or if someone owned large flocks, there would be multiple shepherds. And what would happen, this is fascinating, I learned this in the research for this, what would happen is the different shepherds would come and they would start to call the sheep by name, just as Jesus describes. And the sheep, hearing their name and hearing the voice of their shepherd, would go to that shepherd. And they would separate out the flocks that way, and then the sheep would go. And the way they would go is that the shepherd would lead and would be constantly calling to their sheep. And the sheep would follow. The shepherd didn't herd the sheep. The shepherd led the sheep. That is the way shepherding worked, and still works to this day in places where there are nomadic shepherds. So when Jesus talks about, I am the good shepherd, I know my sheep and my sheep know me. When Jesus says, they will listen, there will be one flock. When Jesus says, the gatekeeper opens the gate and the sheep listen to his voice, he calls his own sheep by name and he leads them out. That's a very specific image. And it's a specific image that matters tremendously. Because the only way the sheep know the voice is if the shepherd is very present, is if the shepherd is very active, is if the shepherd is involved in the sheep's lives on a regular basis. In the same way that we only know the voice of Jesus if we're spending time with him. A good shepherd leads their sheep. He doesn't push. They don't push their sheep. They don't herd their sheep. They lead their sheep. They see where the sheep need to go. And instead of trying to push them that way and corral them, it's a little bit like one of the worst experiences of my life was coaching like 5-year-old soccer. People will sometimes say it's like herding cats, which is 100% accurate. It's a horrible experience. I was not a soccer player really, so I don't even know that much about the game, but you're just hoping that like the crowd will go the right direction, you know, and not kick it in your own goal. When I think of a shepherd, if the shepherd's trying to push, let's say 80, 100 sheep toward a direction, that's going to be really hard to do. It's going to be inefficient. It's going to take forever. But on the same token, if the shepherd is leading the sheep, if the shepherd sees where they need to go and they are confidently walking that direction, calling to their sheep, and the sheep are following the shepherd's voice, they can get there. See, ultimately, when David writes, "The Lord is my shepherd," what I need you to understand is that this is about who governs us. What David is writing about is who the leader is. He's not just writing about someone who cares and tends to animals. He's writing about someone upon whom the sheep are completely dependent and upon whom they have no ability to get where they need to go if not for the shepherd. And the difference between a good shepherd and a bad shepherd would have been tremendous. A good shepherd would have known where green pastures were. A good shepherd would know where still waters were. A good shepherd would know the warning telltale signs of a wolf, of a bear, of a lion. A good shepherd would jump in front of the sheep to defend the flock. A good shepherd, if a lion got stuck in briars, a good shepherd would rescue the sheep from the briars. A bad shepherd, Jesus identifies it here. A bad shepherd doesn't actually care about the sheep all that much. They're just a hired hand. This is just a paycheck. I'm not going to get killed by a lion for a few bucks. They're going to run away. They may not know the terrain. They may not know where the green pastures are, where the still waters are. And so those sheep, they never get there. That image that we have, that it's in our graphic, the bad shepherd never gets the sheep there because they don't know the way. Only the good shepherd does. But the sheep, the only way they get there is by following the voice of the shepherd. They can't get there on their own. They don't know how. They don't know the way. A good shepherd knows where to lead you. A bad shepherd doesn't. A bad shepherd runs when danger comes, but a good shepherd steps in front of the danger. So what does all this mean? As David writes these words, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing." What David is ultimately saying is when Jesus is your shepherd, you will lack nothing. You will lack nothing because he's a good shepherd. And the only responsibility of the good shepherd is the health of the flock. That's all they exist for. It's their entire purpose. It is their entire reason for existence. There is nothing else except the flock. And so, if you're a sheep and you get to pick your shepherd, you're going to pick a good one. And if you pick a good one, it means you will never have to worry, because you will be provided for. You will be cared for. You will be nursed to health when you're sick. You will be saved when you are in trouble. You will be protected from enemies, because your shepherd is a good one. I was an athlete growing up, and I played a lot of different sports. I actually played a lot of soccer, but when I was young, and I don't know anything about it. When my kids started getting involved in sports, I tried coaching them at first, but that was the 5-year-old soccer herding cats thing. It wasn't a great experience. And then as they got older, I made the decision to stop coaching at a certain point in time, because I have a competitiveness that most of you have never seen a bit of, because I hide it. Because it doesn't bring out the best versions of me. I have a competitive fire that is like it rages. And my kids didn't have that when they were young. And so there was one year I coached basketball, and Mason, my middle son, played that year. And there were times, basketball was my main sport, it's my favorite sport. There were times he would walk down the court like this. In the middle of the game. And I was like, I'm done. I can't, because I'm going to kill him. I'm going to just murder, and then I'm going to be in jail for the rest of my life, something is going to be bad. I was like, I'm not ruining my relationship with my kids over sports, so I'm just going to stop coaching. And so what I started doing was I started scouting rec league coaches. Some of you are like, yeah, I know what you mean. I started scouting rec league coaches, and when I found a good coach, I was like, we're going to get our kid on that team. Because what I knew is if I want my kids to develop as a player, if I want them to be good, they need a good coach. And unfortunately, in a lot of rec league sports, there's just a lot of moms and dads who are like, I'll help, and they don't know anything. So I wanted my kids to find a good coach because I wanted them to be good at what they were doing. And we were fortunate that we did. One of the reasons Brooklyn still plays softball to this day is we found a great coach. If you want to end up in good places, you find a good coach. If you want to be provided for, you find a good shepherd. Because as people, we don't want to be like sheep in a sense, but in another sense, we must be like sheep. We're all following something. None of us are really paving our own way. The question is, what shepherd are we following? A good one or a bad one? Because we're all following somebody. When you follow Jesus, when he's your shepherd, you lack nothing, because he's a good shepherd. Now, I want to very quickly just be clear here. I lack nothing doesn't mean you get everything you want. It's not what that means. It's not prosperity. It's not like, well, if I follow Jesus, that means I'm going to be blessed in all kinds of material ways. Maybe not. But what I can tell you is that whether that happens to you or whether that doesn't, if you're following the Good Shepherd, it's going to not be about that at a certain point in time, because he's going to lead you where he sees fit, not where you see fit. Well, if all that's true, what do we do? Because for a lot of us, we want to follow the Good Shepherd, but maybe we don't know how, or maybe we want to know the shepherd's voice, but we don't. It's interesting, as a pastor, I've come across this question many times in my life now. I've been a pastor almost 20 years as a youth pastor, and then as a lead pastor, and I've had so many different people come to me at certain points in time and say, how do I know God's voice? How do I know it? And the best answer I've ever been able to come up with is, well, it's in the same way that you know anybody's voice. You talk. I don't know my wife's voice because I just magically had an ear for it. I know my wife's voice because we've talked for countless hours over many years. So when she talks to me, I know it's her and not someone else. When my kids talk to me, I know it's them and not someone else. When many of you talk to me, I know it's you and not someone else. Right? Anybody remember days before caller ID? When you didn't know who was calling you right away? There were certain people, many people, who if you answered the phone, you had no idea who it was. But there were some people who, as soon as you picked up the phone, you knew immediately who was calling you. because you knew their voice. So what I want to zero in on the last part here today, just for a few more moments, is how do we hear the voice of God? We're going to circle back to a story in 1 Kings. This is a fascinating story. In 1 Kings, there's this prophet named Elijah, and Elijah's in the middle of a very hectic time in his life. Elijah's life was pretty crazy. And at this particular point in time, Elijah is on the run from a king who wants to kill him, and he has this encounter with God. This is in 1 Kings chapter 19, starting in verse 9. It says, "And the word of the Lord came to him," him being Elijah. It says, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He's up on this mountain. "What are you doing?" And Elijah responds, "I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant. They've torn down your altars, and they've put your prophets to death with the sword. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too." Elijah's like, "Hey, God, things aren't great. If you haven't noticed, I hope you've noticed, because I'm the only guy left. Things aren't great, God. What do you mean, why am I here?" So the Lord says to Elijah, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." So Elijah does. It says, "Then a great and a powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper." When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Wind, earthquake, fire. Now, we live in central Ohio where we are blessed to not really have earthquakes. We live in central Ohio where I have been reminded that we have wind. My wife is from West Virginia, and a couple weeks ago when we were having one of the wind days, because we've had several recently, she came in one day for being outside and she was like, "I don't know why I ever moved here. We don't have wind like this in West Virginia. The hills block it." And they do. There's just not wind there like there is here. A couple of those days, man, the wind got loud, like legitimately loud. We don't think of wind as loud, but it is. Fortunately, I've never been in a tornado. I've heard that you listen for the sound of a train, is what people say, right? I've never been in an earthquake. I imagine it's scary, like a big one. I like fire a lot, like a lot. But I tend to like fire in the wood-burning stove, where it's contained. And man, I can make a fire in a wood-burning stove roar, let alone a bonfire. All these things are loud. And the sound from them is enveloping sound. It takes you over. You can't hear anything else. It's fascinating to me that in this story where God is calling to Elijah and Elijah's trying to listen to the voice of the Lord, what we see is that the Lord isn't in the noise. He's in the stillness once the noise passes. This is a passage that I've come back to many times throughout my life because in my 40 years on this earth, our lives have gotten a lot more noisy. Things today are not the way they were 20, 25, 30, 35 years ago. Things were more simple. They were quieter. We didn't have cell phones in our pockets distracting us every 5 minutes or less if you're in a group text. And if you're in a group text, don't add me to that group text. I will not join it. We didn't have these distractions in our pockets. One of the things that I find is I like to listen to, like if I'm mowing the grass or if I'm working in the garden or if I'm any number of different things, I like to listen to like podcasts, right? Well, not that long ago, it kind of dawned on me like, at this point in my life, I pretty much fill up every moment with some kind of noise. I don't listen to tons of music, even though I'm a musician. But I'll listen to music or I'll listen to podcasts or I'm in the house with my kids. There's just noise all the time. We sleep with a box fan in our room and another fan because we like the noise. Just noise, 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 noise. When's the last time you were in the quiet? Like stillness. And you just sat there. Because here's what I can tell you. If you're having a hard time hearing the voice of the Lord, it very well could be that there's too much noise in your life. And if there's too much wind, or there's too much earthquake, or there's too much fire, you will never hear the Lord's voice because it's not there. Can the Lord speak in a voice that overpowers all the noise? Yes. Does he at times? Yes. But there's a difference between the Lord yelling at us, which every now and then he has to do to me. I don't know about you, but every now and then he's got to yell at me a little bit over the noise. But that voice sounds different than the still, soft whisper. And it's the still, soft whisper that's the voice we long for. See, the Good Shepherd doesn't yell at us over the noise of everything else. The Good Shepherd quietly talks to us day in, day out, moment in, moment out. So if you want to hear the voice of the Good Shepherd, if you want to follow the Good Shepherd, then you've got to make room to hear the shepherd's voice, because he will not try to drown out all the noise of your life. He'll just wait for you to quiet down. It'd be a little bit like if everyone was in here talking right now, and I was trying to give this sermon, and I was just talking at a normal volume. Now, to be clear, I would have the ability to yell over the top of everyone in the room. The Lord gifted me with a good yell. But if I was just trying to talk at conversational level, you wouldn't have a clue in the world what I was saying if everybody else was talking. And if you wanted to hear it, you wouldn't say, hey, Andrew, will you talk louder? I mean, you might. But what you'd really try to do is get everybody else to quiet down so you can focus and so you can hear clearly. In the same way, I have to wonder how often the Lord is just sitting watching us go about our lives with our cell phones and with our TVs and with Netflix and with all the different things, with Facebook. Somebody said to me, yeah, I was doom scrolling this week. Any of you ever doom scroll? You know what doom scrolling is? Oh man, it's a thing, isn't it? I wonder how many times the Lord is sitting watching us just going, just quiet down. I'm trying to talk. You can't hear it because you filled up your life with so much noise. For a lot of us, we fear the quiet. We fear the stillness because we don't know what to do in it anymore because the noise has become so normal. See, some of us don't hear God not because he's not speaking, but because we've eliminated every quiet place in our lives where he might. So some ideas. If you want to follow the voice of the Good Shepherd, you've got to learn the voice of the Good Shepherd. You've got to have some quiet. So some ideas. Take 15 minutes to start your day with no cell phone. Ugh. I don't know if I'll ever pull the trigger, but I am legitimately considering going to a flip phone when I'm done with this phone. Because it sounds nice to me, you know? But then I'm like, but where am I going to watch Netflix at 11 o'clock at night when I'm laying in bed? Where am I going to watch YouTube? And I fight that inside, which is a ridiculous fight. The reality is I bet my soul would be healthier if I didn't have all those distractions all the time. 15 minutes to start your day, no phone. Don't make the first thing you do pick up and scroll. Another thing you could try on your drive to work, no music, no podcasts, no noise. Just talk to the Lord. You're already in the car. You've got a relatively quiet environment. If you like to work out, maybe use some earbuds to drown out all the sound around you. Maybe listen to like just some ambient music. Something like that to just drown the noise out. One of the things that moves my spirit the most when I do it is to listen to like ambient post-rock music. Just, I don't know, it just does something good inside of me. No lyrics, it just moves me. But here's the biggest thing. When you pray, and hopefully we all pray, at least at some point, don't do all the talking. Listen. Because what the Lord certainly will not do is try to talk over top of you. He'll wait for you to finish. And then he'll wait to see, well, did they exit the conversation or are they still here? I don't know about you, but I have never found a relationship in my life that is healthier when I do all the talking. And I can do all the talking. The ones that are the best are the ones where I listen for what the other person has to say. And for a lot of us, we don't listen for the Lord because it feels awkward to just sit. But it wasn't in the wind, and it wasn't in the earthquake, and it wasn't in the fire. And I would add that it wasn't in Elijah's monologue that the Lord showed up. It was when all the noise was done and there was stillness that the Lord spoke. If you want to follow the Good Shepherd, if you want to be led by the Good Shepherd, if you want to be governed by the Good Shepherd, if you want to lack nothing, if you want your needs to be provided for, if you want security, if you want safety, if you want salvation, if you want all these things, if you want that beautiful place to go where there is peace, the Good Shepherd is the way. But you must know his voice. And you must be willing to go wherever he leads. Because the fruit of a good shepherd are green pastures and still waters. And the way we listen, or the way we follow the good shepherd, is by knowing his voice. Because he will lead us well. He does lead us well. It won't be easy, but we'll talk about that more over the next couple of weeks. For today, you have a good shepherd. For those of you who have given your lives to Jesus, he is already your shepherd. The question is, will you quiet down enough to listen to him, to hear his voice, to learn his voice, and allow him to lead you day in and day out? Let's pray.